Signore e signori, buonasera. Meet the Media Guru Around Reading sta per iniziare. Vi invitiamo a non spegnere cellulari e tablet per condividere idee, spunti e suggestioni con noi. L'hashtag della serata è Meet Minalima. Be social, be Meet the Media Guru.
Bene, buonasera a tutti, fate bene, fateci sentire che grazie, è proprio veramente grazie. Questo applauso va dritto ai nostri amici Minalima che tra poco verranno qui e prenderanno il loro posto sul palco, quindi applaudite a loro perché hanno veramente dato il cuore, il loro tempo per essere qua con noi e ci riempie di gioia. Lasciatemi dire due parole perché la scena la voglio lasciare a loro e a voi. In questo momento ci sono molte persone collegate in rete come MtMG Guru di solito fa e anche delle persone che sono al piano superiore. Per chi non conoscesse Meet, adesso vi dico due parole. A queste persone posso dire che dopo ci vediamo tutti quanti qua fuori, dove ci sono anche magnifici, magici libri dei Minalima, e poi per scambiare anche in maniera molto informale le nostre idee, conoscerci, perché la cosa meravigliosa è quella di sentire che c'è come una community sempre più attenta alla creatività, con la voglia di confrontarsi con il mondo. Io personalmente lo sento tantissimo. Media Guru lo sente dal 2005 perché ha invitato più di 200 personaggi internazionali del mondo artistico e non solo, e adesso voi siete nel magico mondo, perché stasera mi sento tutta in una magia, nel magico mondo di Meet. Meet è questo edificio che è stato completamente rinnovato, ristrutturato per creare un punto di incontro, incontro con persone come noi, come voi, come artisti, eccetera, che possono qui scambiare le idee su quella che è la creatività, la nuova società che stiamo tutti quanti creando, molto centrata anche sull'uso delle tecnologie, ma su un uso intelligente, smart, creativo. Questo progetto è stato creato con Meet, con il contributo, l'aiuto e soprattutto la passione di Fondazione Cariplo, quindi noi siamo felici che a Milano ci sia un centro come questo che ora vi assicuro è già in connessione con mezza Europa nonché con il mondo. Quindi venite a visitare perché Meet offrirà continuamente contenuti, incontri, format come questi e tantissime altre occasioni. Stasera siamo dentro un programma, a parte che siamo dentro sotto le lampade in una specie di sauna, per cui vedo Mira che sta sventolando, ma stasera siamo dentro un programma MtMG Guru ma un po' speciale, realizzato per Fondazione Cariplo, che ha avuto questa splendida idea di creare una serie di incontri con personaggi da non perdere, artisti e no. Stasera è la prima puntata che si chiama, l'avete sentito, Around Mobility. Reading, lettura. Perché la lettura? Perché sembra che in questo mondo digitale la lettura si perda, perché la passione per la lettura non c'è più, ma chi l'ha detto? Allora a noi ci interessa spingere a Fondazione Cariplo, e adesso io invito qui Michele Andreolotti per un saluto da parte di Fondazione Cariplo. A noi interessa a tutti, a noi, a Fondazione Cariplo, a voi se siete qui, conoscere tutte le potenzialità creative possibili, perché la narrazione, stiamo parlando di quello che sia sul libro, che sia cross mediale, che sia online, non si perda, perché la fantasia non si perda, perché ci siano dei modi anche nuovi di trasmettere storie. E i Minalima di questa sera ci racconteranno anche come loro riescono a trasmettere questa passione per la lettura attraverso una creatività fantastica. Michele, prego. Around Reading è un progetto di Fondazione Cariplo. Ragazzi, Fondazione Cariplo, posso dirlo, chiudo la parentesi tanto per essere informale, meno male che c'è, prego.
Grazie mille.
Prego.
Buonasera a tutti, siete tantissimi ed è fantastico. Io sono qui oggi per salutarvi, per darvi il benvenuto e per ringraziare innanzitutto Meet per aver organizzato questo meraviglioso evento, per ringraziare Minalima, gli ospiti di questa sera, buonasera, grazie, e tutti voi che ci state seguendo e siete qui in presenza, ma so che siete tantissimi anche da remoto. E come spero molti di voi sapranno, Around Reading è appunto un progetto di Fondazione Carepo realizzato grazie al preziosissimo contributo di Meet, che ha appunto diciamo, l'obiettivo di andare a identificare e indagare quello che è il rapporto tra la lettura e l'ambiente digitale. Around Reading, insieme a un'altra serie di iniziative, come ad esempio il recente bando per il libro alla lettura appena concluso, si pone l'obiettivo e rientra, diciamo, all'interno di una progettualità più ampia che vuole identificare la lettura come un asset, un elemento fondamentale per quella che è l'inclusione sociale, culturale e anche economica dei cittadini di quello che è il nostro territorio di riferimento. Grazie a questo palinsesto andremo a capire appunto qual è il rapporto tra la lettura e il digitale. Lo faremo sia grazie ad incontri come quello di questa sera con grandi esperti appunto di caratura e di importanza internazionale, ma anche grazie a dei focus online in cui andremo a mettere a terra queste best practices e andremo appunto a identificare dei nuovi modi per fare e vivere e appunto tradurre in pratica queste lezioni che andremo ad imparare oggi e nelle giornate a venire. Concludo semplicemente augurando a tutti una piacevole serata e ringraziando nuovamente tutti quanti.
Che sono qua con noi.
Ringraziamo tutti.
Grazie a te.
Grazie mille.
Allora, Michele è il project manager dell'area Arte e Cultura di Fondazione Cariplo. Noi non siamo formali e vogliamo entrare sempre di più dentro questi temi che riguardano la nuova società, i cambiamenti, il digitale, quindi il tema della lettura, della narrazione, lo declineremo anche con altri 2 appuntamenti stupendi. E l'aspetto laboratoriale, come ha detto Michele, va sottolineato con questo focus che abbiamo costruito con altri esperti, giusto per approfondire tutta una serie di aspetti legati a questa transizione, se vogliamo, no? Di modi diversi di leggere, di scrivere prima di tutto, ma anche di leggere, di fruire di libri, di racconti e quant'altro. Noi ci piace spingere la passione per la lettura, indipendentemente, questa è la posizione di Meet, dai vari supporti. L'importante è la lettura. Adesso io non rubo più la scena, perché qui sulla scena ci sono 2 grandi personaggi e ci siete voi, perché l'ultima parte di questo Meet Media Guru, di questo incontro, siete voi, nel rapporto con i nostri ospiti, con le vostre domande dalla rete e dalla sala. Allora, 2 parole su Mira Fora Minalima, adesso lo rivelo, è un acronimo, se vogliamo, sì, è un acronimo che è composto di 2 personaggi straordinari. Mirafora in realtà è il suo vero nome, Mina, da cui Mina, la prima parte del nuovo, e da Edoardo Lima di cognome. Allora, Mina è laureata in theater design, Edoardo è laureato in comunicazione. Poi hanno cominciato a lavorare insieme nel 2001 e ora mi rivelano che da 20 anni quindi che lavorano insieme, è come una passione comune che hanno portato avanti. Che cosa fanno? Cosa hanno fatto? Hanno tracciato in tutti questi anni degli universi grafici straordinari che hanno anche attraversato i film di Harry Potter, dove soprattutto anche nell'ultima serie tutta la scenografia, il design, la scenografia dei film gli ultimi, la seconda serie, a parte Harry Potter, ma anche gli animali fantastici e dove trovarli, sono opera loro. Quindi una creatività che spazia dalla grafica al design, all'uso di tecnologie, ma anche la matita, una creatività eclettica, una creatività multitasking, per usare un termine molto legato alla cultura digitale, una creatività contemporanea, una creatività, semplicemente una grande creatività che è approdata anche nella produzione di una serie di libri classici, Minalima Classic, tradotti adesso, e ringrazio anche l'Ippocampo per la loro collaborazione nella realizzazione di questa serata, tradotti anche in Italia, ma non si tratta solo di una traduzione, perché sono libri che raccontano le loro storie classiche in una maniera nuova, dove l'immagine, la grafica, la tridimensionalità, insomma, dopo ne riparleremo insieme. Prima sentiamo loro. Sono veramente delle grandi sorprese, una grande passione. Allora, invito Mina, il primo pezzo del Minalima, Mira ed Edoardo Lima, qui la scena la lascio a loro. Grazie!
Wow.
We're actually going to dance today. We're going to do
No.
Zumba classes.
We didn't rehearse. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Maria Grazia, for inviting us. And I'm actually feel quite emotional, partly because I lived in Italy a long time ago, so it feels like friends, and it's very emotional to be back here, especially after these 2 years of being stuck on our island. Yes. In the United Kingdom.
And you can speak a bit of Italy.
I may speak a little Italian if you need.
Sorry,
yes, otherwise we're speaking in English. But we love meeting people. What an honor to be here, and what a coincidence or serendipity that this place is called Meet, because it's everything that we love doing. And it doesn't mean that we have to do it in person, but also we hope that when we create our work, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, because we would be nothing without our fantastic readership or the people who go to see the films that we work on. So,
and today is our first Mira talk since this horrible pandemic started, so very special night. Thank you, Maria, for making this happen. And I remember, Maria, when I came here, I think maybe 3 years ago, before the renovations, and coming here today and seeing this amazing place. Yeah. Fantastic.
It's also a special year for us, because suddenly it's 20 years later, and I honestly feel like when you have a child and they're like, oh, how you've grown, I kind of feel like we are still figuring things out every day. We're still working out new challenges with our work, when in fact it's 20 years that we've been sharing the ideas. Yes. and projects and how best to do things for stories.
We think it's 20 years, Mira, because maybe we met already in previous lives, because the first day I met Mira on a set of the second Harry Potter film, it was, I don't know, something clicked there, and since that day we never stopped working together, isn't it?
Yeah, this is my work husband, by the way.
Yes.
We came from, we were two different sides of the world, really. Eduardo was in Brazil, I was in the UK.
She sent me the Hogwarts letter, delivered by a parrot, so I came. So I have to come to London. So.
Very obedient, but yes. Clearly a wizard. And we came from slightly different backgrounds, different education perhaps in the creative fields, but all of the bits, all the differences have completely shaped who we are today. And we always joke that the sum of the parts, so how we've joined our two single people together, is much greater in the output at the end. I actually trained in scenografia for the theatre and eventually for film as well, and went on to start working thinking that was going to be the path of my world, which was to work in big film departments for film design, for scenografia. And it soon became obvious that the thing that really made me get up in the morning was all the detail of doing the technical drawings. So if I was doing a technical drawing of a staircase, for example, I was more interested in the how to draw it than what I was drawing. So after a while, I was kind of leaning towards a graphic universe more than a spatial one. But we'll come back to that later about the spatial.
Yeah. And I studied, I'm from Brazil, and I studied visual communication and with a specialization in graphic design, but I never really worked in graphic design. Was my first job working graphic was on Harry Potter, the film, and because while I was in Brazil, I was working editing, and that was amazing because in editing you learn so much about filmmaking, and because in the editing table or the software is where you put the film together and where everything makes sense. So luckily I had a very nice background in filmmaking because of the editing. So I was prepared to understand how to work in a big film like Harry Potter. And
but we soon discovered when we
Yes.
first met that all the little kind of nerdy things that you do as a child, and nerdy creative things, which
Yes.
I bet loads of you do as well, like making magazines, newspapers, shops at the age of
I used
5
to have
or 6.
I used to own 3 shops when I was 6 or
Oh,
like
I
no
only-
like
I
no,
only had 2.
and the post office. You
Oh,
had post
we
office,
both had
yeah.
post offices, yeah. So, you know, going this kind of obsession and curiosity for the everyday, for the quotidiano in objects was already kind of percolating in our heads, and it was play. We were playing when we were children,
Yeah.
both of us, at different parts of the world, and it soon kind of emerged that there's actually a career to be made in this, and it wasn't a joke, it wasn't a play, but
So we in 2001 when I moved to the UK and I went to Leavesden Studio to meet Mira for the first time, and at that time there were maybe 6 or 7 people doing graphics for films, because up to that time, as Mira said, no, there were not really a role for graphic designers in film, like where people in our department or in the props department that kind of knew how to do labels and maps and newspapers. But luckily, since then, it became quite important for all the productions that you need to have a graphic design. You need to have someone that understands about layout, about typeface. So now in the UK, there's like over 400 people, graphic designers working constant now in films and in TV shows. So now it's become very clear that it's important to have this role.
this role.
So,
And,
yeah.
and of course, these are all the kind of work that a graphic designer would do in film are all the essential bits of life that we all see every day, from when we wake up in the morning to go to bed at night. And sometimes you kind of take this for granted, but they're the things that shape the story on the very surface. So after the writings happened, after the perhaps the design has happened and visual effects and so on, our responsibility on a film is to really craft the top layer of how we can tell you as an audience what has happened before that moment and at that moment. And sometimes the before bit is just as important, because if we show you a book that a character has in a film that's incredibly old and has very valuable finishes, gold, and maybe a secret letter in the back, in maybe 2 seconds on screen, you will have all sorts of information that is telling you the backstory about the character and about the situation that doesn't need to happen in the dialogue. And
Yeah.
that's where it's interesting for graphic designers.
A scene that illustrated that perfectly is that scene on Harry Potter and Half-Blood Prince. We get all confused with the names of the film sometimes. With that scene where Harry and Ron fight for the books, for the potion-making book. And now that we have to very quickly show that there is an old edition that no one wants. Everyone wants the new edition, like happens in every school in the world. But we have to do that very quickly to show in aging and printing process and typeface as well, to show there were 2 editions. And you guys quickly get it.
And of course, there's more obvious manifestations of this, like designing newspapers, magazines, and maps and posters where you actually have typography and messages
Yes.
and communication, because after all, our job as graphic designers is to communicate. And that is the principal role, whether you're doing an advertisement, branding for an organization, for a whiskey label. You're trying to tell the audience as much information in that visual moment as you can about that, its personality, emotion, history, the characteristics of the person or the place. And when it comes to things like newspapers, it becomes a little bit more complicated because the graphic design team are expected to write
all the headlines.
All the writing.
Nightmare.
Disclaimer, we are not journalists. So sometimes it's quite an extra task to think about that. But really, what happened in the Harry Potter films, I think we jumped and we didn't say, but you probably know that we worked on the Harry Potter films. What we were really trying to do from day one, and not knowing that there were going to be 8 films, was establish a visual language that would tell the audience that this was a slightly altered universe. It wasn't a completely fictional place. It had all sorts of references that are familiar to us as human beings. And I think that was the absolute key in the writing and in the design to make the audience feel 100% engaged.
Again, a good example is the first prop that Mira had to create for Harry Potter. That was the Hogwarts acceptance letter. And again, no, it was a letter. No, you didn't invent something completely
Yes,
crazy,
I think J.K.
different.
Rowling was very well calculated in thinking, I'm going to give the audience as many references that are familiar. I think familiarity and emotion are 2 things that drive those stories. And it's something that we learned working on those films that really sort of spoke to us about how to tell a story visually, is to dig deep into the emotions of a scene. That's right. Because that's what we want when we go and see a film or we read a book. We want to identify with the characters and we want to feel completely transported into this world. And I think setting up that visual language in the first film was, we perhaps didn't realize we were doing that, but it became...
No, up to the 3rd Harry Potter film, we didn't know that all the films were going to be made. So it was on Harry Potter 4 that was for sure that the series was going to go. But I remember, Mira, you telling me that Stuart Craig, our Dumbledore, the production designer, one of the most amazing known designers we ever met, he said to you, can you come and join me for 5 months? 5 months, 20 years later, no, we are still heavily involved with the Wizarding World, with Fantastic Beasts and everything else, even with our Harry Potter versions, no, our version of the Harry Potter Illustrated as well. So, yes, the 5 months didn't happen.
But we also joked at the time that the place where we made those films, Leavesden Studios in London, I'm sure some of you have been to the tour there, became a kind of hub, like a center of creativity.
Like Hogwarts, actually.
For and we called it Hogwarts. For so many different craftspeople, from costume makers to animal makers, fake animals, and of course, not to mention all the technology, all the development in technology that happened in the film industry, but also in Harry Potter.
The first 2 films, up to the 3rd one as well, we were doing most of the stuff by hand, like cutting and paste paper and gluing with, and photocopying and cleaning the edges and all those things that now we very quickly can do now in Photoshop and Illustrator, but before it was a process as well. And
that's actually a good reminder that, for creative people, I think, however advanced we can all become with technology, it's so important to keep the balance between the handcrafts and the things that you can experience and grow with the computer. And some people will have perhaps a passion more for one or the other, but if you can try and be working with the 2 in parallel, they kind of support each other, and like a good marriage. And
you need to get your hands dirty with ink and paint and coffee mixture that we use a lot to age everything in Harry Potter. So, but one thing that I really was impressed when I met Mira as well is the passion for books in general. We have a passion for reference books, of course, for design, about anything actually, but also for the book as an object. And I like to think that we are both Mira, and we go out there and we rescue books sometimes. We go to charity shops and markets, and I see this beautiful edition with a beautiful cover embossed with gold details. And I just said, how someone can give that away? And they are been selling for like £1, so we go and grab that and save it. And all those things can become after inspiration, reference for the things that we're doing here.
And so much of our reference material, people often ask, how do you know, what do you use, what's the reference? But if we're doing a story that's set in Victorian times, for example, or during the war, we need to go and find how things were done, how they were printed, what the typefaces were, what the papers were used, what kind of pencils and pens, what kind of typewriter, because they were different. Everything, all those little quotidian details inform what we can do to, again, like I said before, to help shape the story and make it believable, because that's our job, is to try and, on a film anyway, and then there's another world.
But we had to do a lot of that for a film called The Imitation Game. I'm not sure if you know about that. And it was all about the coding at the Second World War. And so we had to really investigate which kind of paper they were using, which pencil. And because there were not enough paper at that time, so the people, they were using every single corner of every piece of paper to write the code. So again, that is very interesting. And again, but that was important to have a graphic designer working on that, because we kind of understand the layout of the typefaces and the processes as well.
You need to get geeky.
You need to get really geeky.
About the details. And of course, the details are the thing that, going back to how we met and what the things were that made us kind of engage in this creative relationship, were things like details, sense of humor, the things that made us feel emotional, happy, sad. And it became obvious after 10 years of working on the Harry Potter films, which, by the way, is very unusual in filmmaking, to be able to be engaged in a project with such a long period of time, and working with most of the same people too. So it was really, there was a real harmony in those creative years together, with everybody growing and learning together.
It was like Hogwarts, exactly like Hogwarts.
And of course, we learnt a lot as well, because we went in to the project in 2001, being very different designers, I think, than when we came out in 2010. And when we did come out in
2010, we just look at each other and said, no, we can't stop this collaboration, this partnership. And was when Minalima was born, in 2010.
It kind of started like a joke, and by the way, this is a really good way to start a business, is to just flirt with some ideas about, we kind of, when we were working on the Harry Potter films, we joked about one day when we have our studio, and it was like this thing, like this sort of palace, and we just, if you talk about it enough and joke about it enough, it kind of grows roots and legs. And before we knew it, suddenly we found a very small space in the centre of London with the objective to not do so many films, but to...
Before that, the name emerged. Remember, we didn't know what was...
Oh, yes. Maria Grazia might want to know this, that our name, which does seem to be quite a good combination, we spent about 6 months trying to come up with a really clever, because we work in graphics and we have to think about words and names and brands, and we were inventing things. We would
so there were like several really weird
names,
like merge, design, and...
I think we even looked at all the commands in Photoshop to find something that would be like kind of funky, but it was a really stupid idea. And
I think someone said, I'm not sure who, someone in the film said,
I think
you
it was
guys,
my partner.
you guys have you guys have
the names were
The
kind
name,
of waiting to be put together.
to merge, not to kind of to meet.
So that's yes. So that's how our studio was born in 2010, and we had one assistant with us, and really the goal was to be able to do other projects that could push us a little bit, or could perhaps step out of the world that we had become so kind of familiar with. And it is a theme of how we work, is if you've, and it's not something we talk about every day, but I think it kind of is in the ambience, is if you feel too comfortable where you are in your creative sort of space, then it's probably a natural time to start looking for a new challenge and just be a little bit like when you're in the water and your feet don't quite touch the bottom, just to keep pushing yourself. And I think that's kind of how this project was born, the classics. We had done many books for film, in the films as props.
But also, after 10 years of working on Harry Potter, we thought that when the last film was out, that was it. Harry Potter done, Wizard of the World is done. And we had to find other things to work. And we knew that maybe films, were not something that we really wanted to get to have involved. Because when you work in a film, you are consumed. Like, you cannot do anything. You cannot even think about anything during 9 months of the production. It's so intensive, but it's amazing. It's exciting. So we wanted now to try different things, and the passion that we have for books, and the experience that we had, design all the graphic, all the props, the graphic, the books that we designed for Harry Potter, kind of gave us the ammunition, for us to go out there and try to do for the real world as well. But that is where it starts to get complicated. When we are doing films, we are faking things all the time. So and also you can be a little bit more indulgent, like in the finished, because you are doing just 5 or 6 copies of the same book. In the real world, is a complicated thing, and we had to learn that as well, because.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a shock, because our first commission to do a commercial book for the real world, we were like, yeah, that's fine. We know how to do books, and we really did not know how to do books. We knew how to make paper-shaped things that were pretty and had unusual stories and journeys, and came from wizards and wizard schools. But the real 3-dimensional published book that has to be printed in another country in thousands sometimes, was quite a shock. We didn't even know the terms that came back from the editor that was checking all the things. So,
we had to go on Google and check, because we were embarrassed to go back to the publisher and say, we don't understand what these little things mean.
But it doesn't matter, because actually the most important thing that's always kind of the glue, la colla, is the creative ideas and how you express them. You'll find a way to express them, if it's through the printed page, or the animated page, or the theatre, or whatever however it's manifested. But the most important thing is, as a group, which we've now become because we have a small studio, is to have the solid ideas in the beginning, before you decide how to put them. So the kind of figuring out of the actual how to put them in a book was more a technical thing, which we soon overcame. And we were really lucky to be able to work with good publishers and start off a relationship, which started really with the same ideas that we have in film, which is, what would it be like for Wendy in Peter Pan to have the book of Peter Pan in her room? Like, what would that book look like? And that was kind of our first...
I've been wearing the book.
Oh, yes. We didn't imagine it would be on a T-shirt on Eduardo Lima in Milan. But so it was quite good to have... we always try and think, what's the motivation behind something? And those are the keys that get you into making decisions in design. Yeah. So once, instead of thinking, what would a series of books be like? That's just too big. It's much more manageable to think, what would that one book look like on the floor in Wendy's room in Peter Pan? And then that starts to kind of help you shape the ideas about from the cover to the inside the cover to the treatment of the white page, which is not white, you know, it looks old, the gold finishes, all those details.
That we kind of learn in working films, we try to apply on this collection.
Yes.
But Mira, I needed also to say a big thank you to HarperCollins, because they were the publishers that commissioned us to do that, and they absolutely left us free, and they really trust our vision to retell all those stories again.
And it never really feels like a necessity to look at other people's interpretations of these books, because it's a distraction, and I think that's the case for a lot of design, different kind of designers in different fields. I think if you kind of feel confident or about your own vision, then it's good to stick with that, and also build a team of really strong people around you that can share that vision.
Oh my
to
God,
express
our they are not designers, Mira. I think they're all wizards as well. No, our gang at Minalima, they are amazing. We are so blessed to have an amazing team working with us. And because if they were not there, this collection would not happen as well. So.
And that very first book, the Peter Pan book, which a bit like the film, the Harry Potter films, we didn't really know. It was a bit of a joke again. Let's make 10 books and see what happens. But we started with Peter Pan. There were 3 or 4 of us, I think, in the studio, and we're now about 15 designers in our studio. And that's one of the biggest joys, is applying your kind of creative vision to people and a studio creation as much as the drawings themselves on the page, because the creation of our studio feels like an expression as well of what we like to do creatively, in terms of working with other people, exchanging ideas, the conversations that we talked about before, having a conversation with other minds that are like yours.
And now knowing that those books are being translated to several languages, and thank you again to Hippocampo for an amazing support and love for those books as well. And we are so happy that you guys now can have all those beautiful books, I think.
It's very different as
Italian.
well to know that your book is in people's homes and you can spend as much longer time as you like, each of you, with a book. But with a film, we don't have any control over the work that we've spent a long time doing. Sometimes it gets cut.
You needed to learn the day one. The first lesson to work in films is don't get too attached to anything, because again, in an editing room, they can cut anything and everything. So
and there's so many people involved, and of course this is the privilege of being designers of books, is that you have much more creative control over all the decisions that go into that. And I think it's become obvious from our work and from our work on the films that we are very it's important to us to have a kind of analog aesthetic to our work, which is kind of contradictory to being here in a digital center. But I think what we have learned is that how the process of communication can be transmitted through all sorts of medium, and actually seeing these now projected really large is also kind of part of our. Should we go for a walk?
Shall we sit down and watch?
Is really nice, because it's part of what we're thinking about for the future and how we could take these designs to being something that isn't on the page, because it doesn't have to stay on the page. It could be on large scale in.
But Mira, we are very analog, but also all those things is created on a computer, no? So we are faking analog through digital as well. And that
faking, of course, is a very important bit of filmmaking because it's what everybody's doing, every single person on the production.
I remember I always wanted to work in films. I thought that I was going to be never actor, but a director. And I remember the first time I worked in a film set in Brazil, and I went there and I said, why? But there's nothing behind here. What's going on? And it was a kind of a shock, but at the same time was so interesting to see how you can fake, in a little space and make sure that, you are creating this world, but there's nothing behind that door. And and we do that all the time on Harry Potter. But with the success with this collection, it's so funny because when we finished working on Harry Potter, we thought that was it. 2 years later, Universal in Orlando invited us to design all the graphics for the theme park there. And after, we said, okay, that's fine, finish now. And Fantastic Beasts came. And the third film's coming out next year. And but with those books, in parallel with the Wizarding World work we were doing, what happened? The Harry Potter got excited about those books and said, oh, I quite like what you're doing here. Shall we try to do with Harry Potter as well? So we are now designed and printed the second book's coming out in a couple of
Next week.
Next week, yeah.
Yeah.
So the same kind of process, the same kind of style, the same kind of attention to details with the interactions we are doing now for Harry Potter as well.
But what a strange circle that we started
Yes.
working on the films, went on to work on the theme parks, and did some work for marketing and obviously our shop. And now, 20 years later, we are invited to work back on the very thing that started everything, which is the book. And of course, it's become a classic itself because it's 20 years since the first Harry Potter was published, a little longer now, actually.
Yeah.
So it was, again, we didn't want to look at what we'd done for the films. We're trying very hard. I don't know if any of you have the Harry Potter book that we published, but we're trying very hard to not think what we did for the films because it's a new interpretation, and it just shows that if you have a good story, there are so many solutions. There's so many visual interpretations that can be done, whether it's the film or the illustrations. Who knows what else is going to come? But it's every project that we do is new, and it's those things that engage us in terms of moving forward with our studio.
But each of those books is a very intensive process as well, because the first thing we do, we reread those books, and we do a book map, is where we decide which illustration is going to be done and which parts of the book we will have an interactive. And but that is the process that I love. Maybe it's a little bit because of my editing experience. So I like doing that, the book map. So it's to decide which illustration is going to be done, and also to choose the right moment to punctuate the story actually. But when we do the map, the team gets very annoyed, but at the same time excited because there is so many illustrations that we choose. Like on Harry Potter now has become quite difficult because every single page you could design something and you could illustrate something that no one haven't seen in the films or anywhere else. The same things with those books, because the image that we have from Peter Pan, Beauty and the Beast, and Alice is the films, the Disney films. But when you read the original script, the original stories, is so much more layered. There's so much more characters. There's so much more different locations and places and characters. So again, it's very difficult to go and choose which moment to highlight with illustration.
And of course, there's all those things too. There's the kind of challenges that we never had doing specifically graphics for film. Is in these books we have to think about what's the scene, what's the space, the scenografia, and the costumes and the characterization. So it's a whole world, and of course that is a great privilege for us, I think, to depart from. In film, you are so in a niche. You so have to fulfill your very specific role on a big film. So this is quite a kind of emancipation, I think, for us, this project here.
Like, for example, in Beauty and the Beast, the book is so different from the film, the Disney film, and was quite a shock. Remember when we read, and there was lots of weird witches and magic, and also with The Wizard of Oz, our latest book, the slippers are not red; they are silver. So, and that was also a shock to kind of like, oh. Okay, so we need to fix that.
But I think that says something about the kind of the associations people make with popular culture.
Yeah.
You know, if you've seen something, if you've learned something because you've seen it in a film, it becomes kind of embedded in your head, and it's very quick. We're very quick to make those associations. So sometimes we have to unthink everything that we know already from Disney and from the Harry Potter films. However, it's also a privilege to kind of have to rethink everything.
To give a new life to those classics. We are working on a new book now for the classic, but I asked if the HarperCollins if we could tell you guys the title, but they said not yet. So.
But Wizard of Oz comes out tomorrow, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, which was actually designed and created during the pandemic, and I think it was kind of, we were all obviously working from all our designers, our team were all working from home, so it was quite a dramatic and crazy and emotional time because we were trying to design remotely, everybody remote, but we worked probably more than we did normally, but I think it's kind of ironic that it was Wizard of Oz that happened during that time because it's so mad, and maybe we allowed ourselves to be really, really
I think
free.
it's the most psychedelic book that we've done is The Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
Yeah. And such a reflection of strange times. But you know, it again, what a strange year to know that the creativity is the thing that kind of kept us all employed and all engaged, and all of our team of 15 people, we were all kind of glued together by having creative projects that that kept us sane by being mad. You know.
But also during the pandemic, I think reading and having books were so important to keep us all sane, and as Mira said, we were working on 2 books actually, during the lockdown. We had The Wizard of Oz and the second Harry Potter, The Chamber of Secrets, and the Chamber of Secrets doesn't look too psychedelic, don't worry, but the Wizard of Oz, yes, is crazy. But I think it reflects really well how crazy moments we had during it was really hard, and at the same time we were designing those 2 books, we still had to keep the studio, open and alive, and keep everyone employed. So,
and of course, we'd also had another creative child, which was House of Minalima, which I don't know if any of you have been to in London. Hopefully, we can have one in Italy soon. I don't know, at some point. But we kind of channeled all our understandings of scenografia from school and from working in films, and of course fundamentally the storytelling part of our work, and we founded a kind of shop gallery in London.
The shop found us.
Oh, yeah, we found a very strange building in the centre of London about 5 years ago. Yeah.
The same way we didn't know anything how to design a book for the real world. We didn't know how. We had the shop experience when we were 6-7 years old.
Which
that was
probably wasn't a good training.
And we had no idea how to open a shop and how to staff, how to buy stock. So we had to all learn quite quickly, because we opened House of Minalima just for 3 months as a pop-up, and it became 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 3 years, 4 years, and we still open now. And
but again, the thing that really inspired that space was, how can we create a 3-dimensional space that has a narrative, And to us, it doesn't really feel that different from opening a book.
Yeah.
You know, you open the door to the gallery, and the space is designed to welcome you and immerse you, and perhaps give you a little flavor, taste of what it might be like to go inside the head of someone who's making these things. And that was...
So are you saying that House of Minalima is how our brains look like?
Maybe. We've got lots of gold and red. Yeah.
And layers, yeah. Books and books.
And also, they kind of don't have... They're sort of infinite. So what we would like with the House of Minalima is for it to not have boundaries. So maybe if you opened a door, there might be a whole another thing to discover. So it does feel a little bit like the books and the physical space aren't that different. You open a door and you go inside and get drawn into this world, just like you do when you see a film. So for us, all these things are all very connected. And there's probably other medium that we haven't explored yet that we should. So maybe people want things. So that's just a little bit about our house. Yes. So if you haven't been to London, come and see our house.
But everything we do is all. We have all those loves now for books, for design, for graphics. But what keeps us going in Mira and is storytelling. No, it's all about storytelling, and that is what keeps us alive and keep us going. Is to tell stories, helping other people telling stories, illustrating their words, but also maybe coming up with our own stories.
Yes, it's probably time now, after 20 years, to have our own stories, because we've been quite busy imagining other people's words. But maybe it's time to have our own words. I think we now feel
that we are, confident that we can start telling, I don't know, some original stuff there.
Because it's a conversation. We wanted to invite you to ask us any questions, because otherwise. It's otherwise we're going to be talking. I'm sure you have loads of questions to drop into us. I know you're not shy, because I've lived in Italy, and if you want to ask in Italian, that's fine too.
I can understand a tiny bit of Italian, but I can't speak. Sorry.
A voi.
We don't need.
Ecco già, vedrai che, anzi, forse anche un po' di acqua se.
Thanks. Oh.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Tanto vedo una domanda, preparatevi, prenotatevi. Bene, ancora 1, 2, allora 1 è qua, poi dopo tocca a te. No, prima vedo, sì, devi... quel lato là, alza bene la mano che ti vede, perché da questo lato poi riprendiamo un po' anche qua, senz'altro. Allora, pronti?
Okay, and first of all, thank you for coming here tonight and giving us the speech and all your story.
Thank you for having us.
So my question is, how did you manage the jump from a sort of don't get me wrong on this childish style of the first two Harry Potter movies to a sort of darker and more adult tone and atmosphere in the subsequent movies?
Bisogna tradurre per gli altri o no? No, we can.
I don't know.
No, you're right. The first two Harry Potter films, I think they were much more. A bit more childish and more gold, and is what we like to say. And I think from Harry Potter 3, we have the stories getting a little bit more dark, and is where everything is going to really start to happen. So we had to really also show that on the graphics.
I think, as you said before, we're always working to the script and to the story. So if the story starts to move into darker places, whether it's in the characterization or the the stories that are being told in the newspaper, or eventually an institution like the Ministry of Magic becoming incredibly dogmatic and political. It's our job to try best to show that through the graphics. And sometimes we even, we looked at, for example, Russian constructivist propaganda from the time to see how those kind of typefaces made an impact on a population, or had a kind of personality. So quite often we would look to historical references to inform the graphics, but it's always about the story, what's happening in the story, and how we can reflect that in the graphic pieces.
And again, it's all about as well the lead character is Harry, so we have to always think about him, how he sees things, and of course in Harry Potter 3 is where he starts to get really because of Sirius Black and all these new elements arrive in his life. So we needed to make sure that his world is surrounded by the right information. And the same what we do with the books as well. It's all about Alice, it's all about Dorothy, it's all about Wendy and Peter. So we need to make sure that their world is created and represented correctly at each stage of the story. No? And I think now Harry Potter 3 is one of the majority of people say that Harry Potter 3 is the favorite film, and it's my favorite as well. And I like to think, because it was the film that I've started working full time from day one until the end. So I like to think that's why everyone likes the Harry Potter 3. Oh, actually, and the director was Latino as well. So when the Latinos arrived, we transformed the film.
It's a very deep answer to your question.
Exactly. Thank you.
May I? Thank you. Much as we'd all like to tempest you with questions about Harry Potter, I'll move more to a professional standpoint. But I would want to ask, how is it? Well, now you're 15 in your team, right? You said 15 people working with you. How did you manage, when there was only 2 of you at the beginning, to not overstep, or step on each other's toes, actually? Because, is it just because you do different things, or is it because you kind of developed a way to incorporate each other's styles and decisions? 2 is already difficult to manage. There's 15 now. How do you do that?
I like to think that we have, what you used to say is one big
It was kind of like one
brain.
body with like 2 heads, like a big creative monster. I think at the beginning we were just very complementary. A secret ingredient is a sense of humor.
Yeah.
A shared sense of humor. Might be someone else's might be different, but it just so happened that we seem to share the same values. And I think having the same values is probably more important in a creative partnership or a business partnership than even just drawing in the same way or anything.
Yeah.
So those things the day-to-day things kind of kept us engaged with one another, and we've soon found that maybe one person would be a bit more leaning towards hand drawing, the other person more towards typography, but we always end up doing this with the work. So one person might start something, and then of course you hit a block, so it's like help. So actually at that point 2 is fantastic, because if it's 1, you're really on your own.
But you're right, like when we start working together, our styles were not in sync yet. I think that my style was much more busier. I don't know, maybe coming from Brazil with the colors and the forests and the flowers and everything. I hated leave any white space. Mira was much more
white space.
White space, yeah. But maybe like a year later, I was white space and she was busy, and suddenly, like 2 years later, we had a common style, that kind of work.
And then the same thing happens with the team as well. It might take some people longer than others to kind of pick it up, but usually through interview process and just becoming part of the studio, we kind of end up with complementary skills in the studio. So of the 15 people, some are more illustrators, some are more designers. Maybe they're a bit more technical with digital programs and so on. So complementing teams is just really important. But the human values is number one, I think, in an environment where there's more than one.
And I also know 20 years ago we were 20 years younger, so we could be doing much more things, but now we need more help. Even learning like shortcuts in the softwares, like everyday thing to the young designers. Oh, do you know that you can do this just pressing this? No idea. 20 years work on Photoshop, no idea that pressing 2 keys would do something amazing.
Or by accident, when you just lean on something and you're like, oh, that's how you... So we for the work that you've just seen is almost exclusively Photoshop, but quite a lot drawn in on iPad Pro with Procreate.
Procreate is great as well, yeah.
Having said in the talk that we use our hands a lot, but everything starts with pencil drawings or any sort of analog tool that you want, ink, pencil, we don't mind, but yeah.
So the best thing to have is like your own notebook with loads of sketches, dribbles, whatever you want to draw. Just keep doing that in your notebooks, and after you can transport all that to the computer. But the first things is always nice to do with the pencil and the paper.
Can I ask, are there lots of designers here?
Alzate la mano. Sulla mano. No.
They're so shy. Designers are so shy.
Okay.
Another question.
Hi, thank you. So my question is about storytelling. So about storytelling. So which is the process through which you decide which scene of that story will have a drawing?
Good question, because decision making in design is, we know that you can have anything out of 300 pages. It could be lots of different things. So at some point you have to decide. And Eduardo's first job is to do...
We made a decision that we didn't want to make a graphic novel. We didn't want to illustrate every single, all the dialogue and everything. And otherwise the books would be this thing. And also there is the reality of the process, like the printing and how much paper, how many paper and all that stuff. So we have to, at some point, like, okay, I'm going to get too excited here with all the select. So you have to go down, you have to go back, reread. So it's a long process, but it's a lovely process to make sure that all the right moments have been selected
and we learned from going from doing the fake books for films to doing these real books, the process of book design is very three-dimensional. Yeah. And at first you think it's very two-dimensional because you're designing flat images for a page, but actually there's an architecture to the book that's all the time transitory, because as soon as you move something, it affects something else. And so it's a very sort of three-dimensional process, which was quite a revelation. We didn't, especially with the inserts in our book, because we have around 8 interactive pieces in all of the books. We've done the illustrated books.
We didn't want also to make pop-up books. We wanted them to be interactive, like small surprises when you are reading the book, and you have that moment that you stop for a few minutes and discover, and you open a little piece here, or open there.
So there's kind of rhythm to the design, like in music or in a film, you have the kind of dramatic points. So you have to be thinking about that as well as the technical, making sure that they fall in the right places. But I think the rhythm of a book is really important in terms of design. And
so sometimes I am that annoying editor that goes and cut like a drawing because there's no more pages, or there's for other reasons we have to cut that.
Is that like payback for working on films? Yeah. It's just like...
or sometimes we allow more pages because we make more space here and there. But I remember when we were setting up Minalima in 2010, a very good friend of us that introduced us to several publishers in the States, he told us, not to remember, Mira, do not do books, don't design books, because they take too long and they don't pay well. And we completely ignored that. Because again, no, the passion for storytelling and for books as an object was much bigger than...
I think we've ignored lots of things, actually. Just now that you've used the word ignore, I'm sure we've been told lots of times, do not open a shop. Don't work in film. Don't work in... do you have a plan B?
Yeah.
Like, it's not... It's just not a conversation you have with people who are driven by what they do and want to express themselves. So hopefully we put them wrong by now. There's a really good question. I just saw a good question in there, which was in the studio. Could say it in Italian, maybe.
Ci sono molte domande, sì, che arrivano dalla rete.
I just saw one about, is there just...
Quale?
Up a bit. Is your studio made of just computers or also scissors, paper and pen and paintbrushes?
Everything.
Everything.
Mentioned that.
Yes, and it's really nice to see that because
and
it's...
the project with the VR or for VR?
VR project.
The next
maybe
maybe
next year we'll come here and we'll all be sitting there. It's really nice not knowing what's next, actually, because otherwise life would be so boring. I think we need to just know that the ideas can be transported into different media.
But one thing that we know for sure, whatever will be next will be about stories and storytelling, because again, that is what keeps us alive. I like that question. Can I work with you?
Yeah, so many people...
Where does it say? I think there's a question.
Ci sono persone al piano di sopra. Non so se qualcuno vuol fare una domanda che riguarda appunto questo incontro, le curiosità. Un incontro, come ho letto anche nei vari sondaggi che abbiamo lanciato, dove la parola narrazione, lettura e immaginario sono le parole che ricorrono, no? Sono le parole chiave di questa serata. Io voglio poi intervenire, ma volevo capire se c'è qualcuno anche dalla sala sopra, poi ci incontriamo tutti insieme. Altrimenti, se c'è una domanda dalla rete precisa che volete fare.
Sì, Maria Grazia,
eccola.
La leggiamo dalla
Costanza,
rete.
dilla, dai.
Come è nata l'idea di rilanciare con una nuova e innovativa veste grafica i classici della letteratura per ragazzi?
Why?
How did we get the idea to start this series of classics for children?
Okay. How did you do that, man?
I think one of the first things was how would we... It was a little bit of a reaction from working on films. We wanted to have a little bit more control of our own creative work, and we worked with the publisher and said, what would it be like to do the kind of work we do in films, which is to create these articoli di carta and storia, historic pieces, to be inside a book. Like, it would be such a sort of a challenge to get everything into this small space. So how would that be? And she seemed quite happy, the publisher, to take...
Actually, the right answer is that goes back to editing. No, Mira, it goes back to editing. It's like every time when we go and see a film that we work and say, oh, that thing that we work and spend a lot of time doing is not that anymore. And we always joke that we wanted to make a film just about the graphics. The film just with graphics, with newspapers, maps, nothing, just graphics. And that was also what kind of informed us a little bit for those books. It's like, okay, now we have 100% control in these stories, and we will now put loads of graphics everywhere.
Ancora una domanda? Prego. Ma faccio una domanda a voi, ma quanti di voi hanno sfogliato i libri, i classici Minalima? Ah, però. E allora la domanda la faccio anch'io a voi, ma questi libri che avete sfogliato sono così, li trovate anche invitanti per scoprire la storia e leggere la storia? Due mani, anzi una alza due mani insieme, fantastico. Quindi mi confermate quella che è un'impressione, Mira, che ho, che quando appunto non sono solo libri pop-up, metto un'illustrazione, ma quando creo un processo di design grafico come questo, che ha il background che ha, e non lo sto a ripetere, l'hanno raccontato bene loro, si crea una sinergia fantastica. Io sento molto questo quando sfoglio questi libri e ti spinge e ti ritorna la voglia di leggerli, che sono libri pensati per i ragazzi, ma in realtà sono dei classici. Perché? Perché questa parte visual non è un'illustrazione, è un'esplorazione tridimensionale, è una... com'è? C'è una parte esplorativa che loro spingono molto, che poi ti porta... Come? Lo dica lei perché... posso darti il mio microfono?
Dicevo che c'è tutta la parte esplorativa, no, da parte dei bambini, ma poi c'è anche l'esplorazione di capire come funziona quella cosa. Cioè, non so come dire, magari si rompe, ma non si rompe, cioè non so come dire, voglio vedere come è fatto.
Quindi c'era anche la scoperta del libro, questo invito che facevano loro della esplorazione, la carta che è ancora con noi, che è arricchita. Noi potremmo usare un linguaggio molto digital che è quello dell'augmented, un augmented reading, non lo so, ma a me fa questa impressione perché mi porta ad aver voglia di leggere, perché c'è una passione in questi libri che si avverte, che è un arricchimento impressionante. Prego. Sorry.
If I understood correctly, also when we were designing these books, we were worried that books would finish. No, there was that moment that books were like all going to the tablets and not having, maybe children and young people not having that relationship with the paper, with the smell of the book, with the ink, with that object, was something that we were worried as well. That because we love so much books. Luckily, it's not happening. No, the books are being printed, the stories are being created, and people are reading more than they ever read before. So, and the books are not going anywhere. No, as objects.
Maybe even more, because the more digital you have. Oh. Let's get another question. No, even with the fantastic development of digital technology and the changes that we've seen in the last 5 years, historically there's always going to be a kind of a balance. So maybe that even gives us more of a space to have something like a treasure, like a sort of something that you would pass to your children. The object itself is a piece, yeah.
No, people tell us that they have to, unfortunately or fortunately, buy 2 editions of the book. One is to give to their kids, and one is to keep in their bookshelves.
Maria, grazie. Abbiamo anche una domanda dalla sala immersiva.
Diamo voce, guardate che non vi stiamo trascurando, vi stiamo vedendo e tra poco ci incroceremo anche di persona. Prego.
Mi sentite? Sì, ok. Quali sono stati i punti di ispirazione che possono essere dei luoghi, degli oggetti, delle persone che non mancano mai nelle vostre ricerche per la produzione di un libro o di un film?
Oh, $1 million question. Inspiration.
Someone else yesterday told me, like another designer, she said, the moment I wake up, everything I see becomes an inspiration. And I said, actually, that is true, especially when you are a creative. So, like, you are always searching for things that excites you, and so the world is the, and it's, sometimes it's quite upsetting. We do that all the time. Is that we are walking in a beautiful street or in a park or in a museum, and we are on our Instagram, on our Facebook, checking the emails, and come on, we can do that later. Just absorb that moment, because you never know where that little walk that you did from here to there could give you so much inspiration and reference for something else.
And we have a really big library of books ourselves, of reference books. Not so many of contemporary graphic designers, because it's not really our field, if you like, and it sounds strange. We've got lots of books on really strange things, like ribbons and buttons and boxes and architecture, ironwork, flags, labels,
laces, and
strange.
Yeah.
But our library is very big, and I think anyone who's working in any creative field is sort of build your army, your castle of books around you to both protect you, but also to just feel safe. It's kind of our palace. Yeah.
For example, we arrived today here at 1 o'clock, and by 2:30 we were in a hotel, and we already have over 75 pictures on our mobile, just because of little things that we saw in this corner here. So just, everything out there is an inspiration, and just keep your eyes open.
There was...
Altre domande, ultimi minuti, poi
on the reference and the inspiration for films is a little bit more different, is a little bit more complex, because depend of which story you are telling. Now, for example, Harry Potter was a mishmash of information and styles. You could mix, Baroque and Gothic, and would make sense. And on a different film like The Imitation Game, you need to be much more focused, and you need to be much so. But also, is fantastic, because you are not really sure that you understand. We think that we understand what happened at that moment, but not. It's only when you do the research, when you go to the libraries, when you go and find the books, that you will find all the information you need. And another thing that we always say is don't only rely on the internet, on a Google search for reference. You have to go also to museums and libraries, because it's not every single book that have been scanned that is available there. When you go to the libraries and to the museums, you find so much more than what you find on a computer. Of course, the computer is amazing, Google search is amazing, but if you have the time and go to a library, go to the museum, and you will find amazing stuff there. We did a lot of that now here on Harry Potter. We used to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum nearly twice a month, just to go there, just to absorb, just to be in that environment, to kind of be contaminated by those amazing designs and pieces that were there.
Prego.
Thank you. Based on your experience, what do you think is the future of book and reading? Is it cross-mediality? Is it augmented reading, just as Maragazza said before? Yeah. What do you think is the future of book and reading? Thank you.
Wow. I would, just as in other media, I'd love to see new writing, I know we're designing the classics, but I think to see new work in the writing side of things, and collaborating with new artists. And we've demonstrated that there is a place for a very decorative, indulgent to an extent, kind of nostalgic take on publishing. And that's demonstrated in the popularity of these books, for not just for children. They were for children, but we've seen that many adults are buying them for themselves. So I think if there was a relationship, if we could use that in conjunction with other medium, that would be really what we would like to have a go at doing.
But I think with Harry Potter, that is a very good example. No, it started with a book that was published in 1992, correct me if I'm wrong, and on a paperback and a hard copy, and after, look how many things that were done because of that story. Have films, have experience, have museums, exhibitions, and so it's endless what you can do now with it always goes back to the storytelling. If the storytelling is good, is compelling, is magical enough, it's endless what you can do with those stories. And with the digital world now, with the VR, with the augmented reality, is very, very exciting what can be done.
C'era una domanda prenotata qua, prego. Poi.
Sì, quando è stato presentato il Giardino Segreto alla Fiera del Libro Bologna, la casa editrice Ippocampo ha riempito il proprio stand di fiori, foglie, ed è stato veramente una ricchezza per il cuore, per la mente. E io lavoro in una biblioteca. Quando ho prestato il libro Il Giardino Segreto diverse volte, poi a un certo punto l'ho letto anch'io, e c'erano ancora le carte veline tra un'immagine e l'altra per dire la cura, ed era la 10ª persona che lo prendeva in prestito, per dire la cura con cui tutti gli utenti precedenti hanno letto il libro. Quindi veramente grazie per questa vostra cura dei particolari.
Fantastico.
Thank you. And actually, they have done another fantastic allestimento at the Turin Book Fair, where we're going on Friday for The Wizard of Oz. So our hearts go out to Ippocampo for realizing our work from the page into spatial design, and of course, sharing those ideas with the public in a different way, which is exactly how we want to share the ideas, and why we keep saying it doesn't need to stay in the book. We need to kind of explode the book into other medium, and that's our next challenge.
Io direi grazie, questa è una bellissima serata, grazie Minalima, ma non abbiamo finito, perché a me personalmente ha dato la voglia di prendere questi libri, di guardare, ma di tornare a leggere, non solo guardare, perché con la passione, la voglia di... Insomma, alla fine, ragazzi, il tema è la narrazione, continuare a raccontare storie, leggerle queste storie, viverle con questa experience così creativa che loro trasmettono attraverso questi libri meravigliosamente poi pubblicati anche in Italia. Gli spunti sono tantissimi. Questo è il primo appuntamento di una serie che riguarda around reading, intorno alla lettura, quindi la progettazione, il design, come riscoprire, come trasmettere alla fine una grande passione, che sia di tipo progettuale, di tipo narrativo, di tipo fruitivo, mettendo insieme tante risorse e tanta creatività, e quindi vi invito anche alle prossime puntate. Intanto ringrazio tantissimo, adesso poi c'è una sorpresa, perché non l'annuncio, ma il prossimo anno ci ritroviamo, quindi to be continued. Vedrete che andremo avanti con l'esplorazione di narrazioni e di novità insieme ai nostri due amici Minalima, e grazie a voi per essere qui con noi. Tutte le domande cercheremo di trovare il modo di rispondere. La registrazione di questa serata la troverete sul sito di MIT. Ringrazio Fondazione Cariplo che ha permesso di costruire questo programma e di realizzarlo a partire da questa sera, e adesso alziamoci come di solito facciamo, e grazie veramente per la vostra passione e partecipazione. Grazie a loro.
Maria.
Thank you. Thank you.